Okay, so when we talk about the simple plan, we're literally talking about something that we can use in an exam situation when time is against us to think about the organization and the structure of an essay. So for an analytical essay, actually, we can be very structured, very simplistic in our plan because our marks come from the quality of analysis that this plan produces. Okay, so we don't want to be wasting too much time planning. We want that time to analyze and develop a detailed response, but we still need structure, we still need organization. So this is it. We're going to write a paragraph that analyzes the graphological features, the headline, the stand first, any other visuals. We're going to write a paragraph that analyzes the opening section or the opening sentence of both articles. The difference, how do I decide whether I'm looking at a sentence or a section? It's all about your ability to write under time conditions and your intention. What grade are you intending to aim for? Okay, so we can sometimes get more to analyze by looking at the whole section as opposed to the sentence. But if we're struggling to write and manage time, it's better just to look at the sentence. Again, it's a similar thing when we get to the middle presentation of views. It says here 1 to 3. Now, what this means is I've looked at the graphological features, I've analyzed the opening sentence. By now, I know what the overall sense of point of view, feeling, perspective of my writer is. If I've got an angry writer, when I get to presentation of views, I need to find 1 to 3 words or phrases from the rest of the article that prove they're an angry writer. If I want to suggest that my writer is biased, I need to find 1 to 3 bits of evidence that prove that they're biased. If I want to show that my writer's funny and relatable, I might find 1 to 3 bits of evidence that prove, that corroborate that perspective, that this writer is funny. If I am being persuaded by this writer, I need to find 1 to 3 bits of evidence that shows that they are presenting their views in a persuasive way. So that's what it means when we talk about presentation of views. The difference between 1 to 3 is, again, what grade am I aiming for and how am I managing time? If we're looking for A grades, we are looking to build a strong case, which means we potentially need 2 to 3 bits of evidence from both articles to build a case, to say this is definitely the attitude, the perspective of the writer, because there are 2 to 3 bits of evidence that prove it. If we're looking for that C grade, we definitely want one paragraph that analyzes presentation of views. Okay, we then want to look at the closing sentence and section. Beginnings and endings are so important for cohesion. Does my article begin and end in a similar way? Is it a cyclical structure? And we've seen through the work we did last week that both our articles do have quite cyclical structures, but that we will address in our essay writing. So we want to look definitely at the closing sentence section. I would even argue if you're aiming for an A and you're looking at presentation of views, I would stop and make sure I analyze the closing sentence rather than just keep going on down the presentation of views, the middle section. Okay, because it's really important. It gives you a sense of cohesion and how the article is going to end. Okay, we then want, because it's good manners, a conclusion. Summative or evaluative. Now, again, summative conclusions are going to get you a C grade. It brings the essay to a neat conclusion. It just summarizes how both articles have worked to present their views. Evaluative gets you your A grade. If you are evaluative, you are you are looking at the effectiveness, how well both articles work. Now, you might have on the day 2 articles that work really well. You might have 2 articles that are really rubbish, okay, that you want to give a negative evaluative conclusion on. You might have one that's really good, one that's really bad. So looking at the evaluative conclusion, that's why it gets you the higher grades, because you're a discerning reader who can look at how well something works. Okay, so that's our 5-stage simple plan. Graphological features, opening sentence, presentation of views, closing sentence, and summative evaluative conclusion. So what we're going to zoom in on now is a single paragraph outline. In other words, once we've got our simple plan, what goes into each of these 5 stages? If we imagine that each of these represents as a minimum a paragraph, what goes into each paragraph? And this again is actually where there is a little bit of what we call congruence, that you can put the same things in each paragraph. Okay, so to do this, I'm going to introduce an acronym. Now, a bit like Marmite, you either love an acronym or you hate them. I think they can be really useful. They can give you a structure, they can give you a starting point, but once you're confident and create your own autonomy, your own voice around these questions, you can use it or not use it. But I want to just use this with you today as a tool. So we're really thinking about what goes into each paragraph. So we've got our 5 stages, our 5 simple plan stages for our whole essay. Now what goes into each paragraph? And we're going to create an ideal paragraph. We're going to create a paragraph in which we identify and interpret a perspective. Now, we introduced the idea that perspective means an opinion, an idea, a feeling, a thought of the writer. So in each section, through the graphological features, the opening, a presentation of views, the closing paragraph, and in our conclusion, what is the perspective, the opinion, the thoughts, the feelings of the writer or the person towards the topic that we want to identify and interpret. We then need to describe how the language is working to present that idea using our language labels. So we're going to identify and we're going to describe. Now, at this stage in the plan, the E, there is a little distinguishing factor between the mark scheme for the mark scheme. So we can then explain the meaning of what we've identified. We can explain the meaning of the language that's presenting the point of view. We can explain and comment on the effects and the representation, or we can evaluate how well it's working. So we recognize that evaluation is a higher order skill. We can either use it in our conclusion, but for those real strong A's, we really want to integrate it throughout our response. We want to be evaluating as we go. Okay, so our E means we're either going to explain meaning and representation and effects created, or we're going to evaluate those effects and representation. Now this again, this A, this is important for higher grades. Okay, we want to be able to appreciate language in context. The truth is, words change meaning, effect, representation based on context. Okay, writers change how they use language based on context. If we imagine text B, Dr. Katie Edwards, she is a professional academic. So in the classroom, in university, she's probably using language differently than she is when she writes this article. I doubt Dr. Katie Edwards goes into her professional environment, into her classroom and shouts at them, "Shut your face," when she wants to get their attention at the beginning of the lesson. But for the context of an opinion-led article where she's looking to establish a very quick rapport and point of view with her audience, she's not afraid to take that risk and say, "Shut your face." Okay, so it's the context that can affect meaning, that can anchor meaning or make us appreciate meaning in a different way. So for a higher grade, we take the language that we're analyzing, we take the idea we've identified into context and say, because this is an article, because this writer is angry, because, so we're looking at context. And then because it is comparative, we want to link and compare across the two texts. So just pause in a minute, write down that acronym. It's a good one to have a record of, to remember. It's a nice way to think about structuring an analytical paragraph, and we're going to practice it in the latter part of this lesson. Now, just to prove that these acronyms are based on an understanding of the mark scheme, we're going to very quickly remind ourselves of an A grade student. Now, this A grade student, we have seen them before. The exam board don't put out lots of A grade responses. So we have looked at this candidate's response before, but we're looking at it from a slightly different point. Okay, so again, I like this A grade student's response because it does demonstrate that they identify a viewpoint, they describe using linguistic labels, they explain and evaluate the effects. They do begin to appreciate context, and they do make 2 clear links. So again, what I love about this paragraph is that it reminds us as well that the exam board do not look for perfection. They are not unrealistic. They understand you're under time conditions, that you are A-level students. So they are looking for what you do that meets the criteria of the mark scheme, not what you don't do. And if there are errors, they don't take away points for that. Okay, so text A uses the title to position the audience as if they've heard the issue before. So he is identifying something that the text does. Do women really talk like 12-year-old girls? And he's backing that up with evidence. The use of the adverb of degree. So there he's describing adverb. He's got that lovely adverb of degree, so that 2 levels of description that we talk about for the higher grades, and it implies the publication is challenging a widely accepted viewpoint. So then he's cycling back to identifying perspective, what the text is doing in terms of views and viewpoints. Text B uses an imperative. So far he's working at that level of identification and description. He's moving across the 2 texts brilliantly. Young women give up the vocal fry. This positions the author as a voice of power. So again, beginning to identify that viewpoint. Text A mainly uses a question to appeal to those interested, while text B will grab the attention using a strong sounded instruction. So that's linking across the two texts using whilst also explaining the effects created. Okay. Contrastingly, text B uses an image of a female. This effectively creates relatability between the author and intended audience, so they feel like it's someone of them rather than an outsider. So then we've got a lovely integrated kind of explanation that talks about representation, the impact on the reader and the audience, and is beginning to appreciate that as an author of a journalistic piece, they are establishing that writer-reader relationship. So this is an A-grade response where our student is consistently showing the ability to identify, describe, explanation with some evaluative, comment, and links. So just, and we're now going to use that model in our own writing. Okay, guys, so when we did the analysis of the text last week, we looked at both of these headlines, the graphological features of one being a BBC Worklife webpage, the other being from the Telegraph. We've got notes on this. So really what we're going to just do is check our notes to make sure that from the notes we've already made, we're going to be able to identify and interpret a perspective of each writer. So that could be what the writer thinks, feels, or has an opinion at this stage. Now, at this stage, it might be immediately positive, negative, or ambivalent. We might not be sure yet what the writer feels, what their opinion is, or they might make it very clear. That's going to help us then focus in, zoom in on the language that we want to describe. Again, we've already practiced the labeling of these, so it's just going to be using those notes in a more coherent way. We're going to look to explain and evaluate the effect. So what's the meaning? What's the impact? What representation is being created? And for that, appreciating context. When we did look last week, we reminded ourselves of the affordances and constraints of these forms. So that could help us think about context right from the start. And we're going to look to link and compare. Now, guys, we're going to actually cheat and put another layer in place in a minute where we're going to use the wording and the framing of the grade 8 student to guide our own. But I just want you to take a moment, press pause, look at your notes from last week, look again with fresh eyes and think to yourself, what do I need to comment on? So does your accent make you sound smarter? So we know that's the interrogative headline. Now at this stage, we could say this is an ambivalent opinion. They seem at this stage a bit detached. They're not making it clear what they think or feel. There's a little sense in which they're introducing the topic of accents and how they relate to intelligence without revealing yet the writer's opinion. So that's still us identifying perspective. Immediately, as a point of contrast, shut your face, I'm fed up being ridiculed for my regional accent in academia. We have an immediately contrasting effect. We're having, it's immediately emotive. The opinion of the writer is one of kind of frustration and aggression, and that's not hidden. Okay, so we've got those two areas that we can immediately home in on. So to bring this lesson to an end, we're going to create our own paragraphs of analysis looking at the graphological features. We've got text A, just to the right, so that's our student, our A-grade student. Now, I've just given a sentence stems here directly lifted from student A. I'm not going to lie, this is called magpieing. We are stealing his structure or their structure. Now, at this point, if you want to write a paragraph of your own using your own structures, or you start and then go off and develop your own voice, that's actually exactly what I would encourage. But if you're really stuck, what I want you to do is to pause, and you are going to write your own paragraph that follows these structures. So text A uses the title to position an audience as if they are. Now here it's saying you've heard the issue before. Now text A is that question, do accents make you sound smarter? So what's that positioning us as an audience to do? Text A uses the title to position an audience as if they are being encouraged to think for themselves about this topic, as if they are being positioned to actively engage and debate with the issues. So guys, you are going to copy and complete this paragraph using the sentence stems, and that's going to give us the opening to our essay. I'm just going to let you do that for the end of the essay. Now, if you want to send me this opening paragraph and submit it, that would be lovely, but you're definitely going to send me the whole essay once it's been put together. So next lesson, we're going to look at what we build the essay around, Until then, get on with your starter. Bye.